Hello, Angelo. Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you for accepting our invitation.
You're welcome.
It's great to have you here. So you're participating to this GFSI conference. What is the relation between you and food safety? Can you tell us about it?
Well, I am actually working as an artist and as a scientist because I work in both fields, art and science. I'm actually working on the future of food. That's one of the things that really interests me. I've been working with space agencies like NASA, European Space Agency, on the future of food. But I'm also addressing this from a cultural perspective. So I have multiple angles to think about the future of food on our planet and beyond.
Yeah, and the future of food, it's interesting because as everybody knows, but sometimes they forget that HAZAP was born in space almost. Is it something that is, when working for space programs, or is it something that is really a priority, the food safety?
Of course, when you set up a mission with astronauts, you want to keep them healthy and safe. Of course, it makes obvious sense that this is a really key component. But there is more than just the safety of food. Of course, there is a whole how to put it. You have the nutrition that you have to take care of. And also the psychological effect of food is really important. And that's something that is sometimes a little hard to wrap your head around, because on one hand, you can look at humans as machines that need a certain amount of energy, a certain amount of molecules every day to keep operating. But people are not machines, of course. And so there's a really interesting anecdote that I can share with you. When they were designing the ISS, the International Space Station, they were not including a table, because they were like, tables, that's for Earth. It's something you need gravity for a table. In zero gravity, it makes no sense to have a table. You put something on the table and it will fly away. So space is a new frontier. It's a new environment. We're going to use a different architecture. No more tables. The first astronauts that were living in the ISS started complaining not having a table. Even though the table was not very useful, they wanted a table. And the reason was that they wanted this for the ritual of gathering together, sharing food, sharing stories, and doing something that seems to be deeply human, that is connecting over food and talking about food and exchanging. And so when we talk about food, we also have to talk about that human component, the emotional component, the psychology behind food, as much as approaching it from a very technical perspective.
And the cultural aspect, as
and the cultural aspect, yes.
It is true that when we, as outsiders, say, when we think about food in space, we always see the pills. I know that they are probably constrained because of the gravity of the type of food, that it doesn't interact probably with the instruments on board, or that it doesn't do some small particles. But is there, to your knowledge, because you're talking about this food culture, are there some foods that are done so that they are at the same time nutritional, but also the organoleptic aspects of it?
Well, actually, that's a huge misunderstanding about space food. And indeed, in the very beginning of the space program, the idea was to create the ultimate perfected food that would get absorbed by the human body instantly, that would not cause any crumbles that would fly around. And that's where the idea of food in a tube came from. And that's mostly people think that astronauts are still just squeezing food in their mouth when they're in space. Interesting thing is, once again, we're dealing with a kind of psychological aspect here. Astronauts hate this.
I can imagine.
And you have to realize these were tough astronauts. These were test pilots. They were really used to very challenging situations. They were selected because they had a lot of guts, but they couldn't handle eating out of a tube. That was something that was just unacceptable. So very quickly, in the space program, they realized that they had to rethink what kind of food they were offering. And so what basically happens is that when you're in space, I've experienced it. I've not been in space, but I've participated in a Mars simulation. I've lived for 4 months locked up in a Mars habitat on the flank of the Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii, pretending I was in space, and I've experienced something similar. You start craving for comfort food. You don't want anything artificial. You want actually the things you know from home. So there's a lot of effort when they're preparing meals for astronauts that they're actually as rich and as varied and as normal as they can be. So it's quite the opposite. So instead of something very high tech and weird, it's actually something very normal and something very common that is appreciated in space. One of the most favorite food items in space is the tortilla bread. Oh. That's like the number one. Why? Well, it's handy because it doesn't crumble, but also because you can customize it.
I see.
And that's something that is really appreciated a lot. And that's also something that I personally, during my food study for NASA, also experienced. Being able to have a bit of ownership over the meals that you eat.
You can do something with it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very interesting. As we know, there are constraints, of course, in space in terms of you are locked down in a small, relatively small environment, where you have also very strict rules that you have to apply. Is there something from your perspective that we could use in terms of culture or working together mode that we could inspire the food safety specialists in the plants? How to build, let's say, a team culture focused on food safety? And
my expertise is really in the field of co-creation. And of course, co-creation has been going around for decades now. People have been using that word on and on, over and over again. But I think it's really important to kind of take a step back and to redefine co-creation and bring it back to its essence. And that's something that goes beyond the field of space exploration. That's something that I'm doing across the board in my art projects, in my scientific work, etc. And co-creation is really this attitude that you allow people to step in another field. Maybe they're not experts in it, or they don't have a deep background into it, but they have a capacity to reflect on that domain, or they have a personal interest in that domain, which is, most people have multiple interests, but professionally we're often constrained to one particular task or field. Now, if you have a team and you allow people to step into all the different domains that are needed to solve a challenge, and you create a culture in which these different perspectives and these different ideas are taken seriously, you massively increase the collective intelligence of that whole team. And this is a very powerful approach to really innovate and to move forward. The thing is, it needs careful facilitation. Humans are territorial by nature. And so, for example, an engineer with a certain specialty or a scientist with a certain specialty might feel uneasy when somebody who has no background at all suddenly starts, giving advice or having ideas about their particular domain. Now the thing is, it's specifically because people don't have this huge background that the professionals have or that the experts have, that they might be able to look at things differently. They might actually help to rethink the problem. And I think if you really, and this is what we need for food security and food safety in general, we need to come together over disciplines, over cultures, but using facilitation to make sure that this works and that people actually respectfully start working.
I think it's a very strong point in terms of culture. We have it. It is embedded in HAZA because they say it's a multi-functional team. But of course, that means that the expert who is leading that must be very humble and have these facilitator skills.
Exactly.
And let the others who are not so skilled or experts express themselves, as you mentioned.
It's really a question of ego.
Yeah, and also.
Sometimes it's not about technology or technicality. It's really technicalities. Sometimes it's not just about technology, but it's really about ego and overcoming that. I'm not saying that I'm always perfect at this. But I have a big passion in trying to connect people. And
passion for food is what connects actually
and
all
food,
the people
food, yes,
around here in the GFSI. So thank you very much, Angelo. It was a very insightful comments, and have a great conference.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.